now on the Daily Debrief.
I'm dying. I just didn't think I was going to make it.
But he did make it, and now this state trooper made famous on Live PD is naming his alleged shooter.
So I'm 100% sure he shot me.
But do authorities have the right man?
We are all here because of Ramon Luna Bueno.
Plus, a verdict in the case of a Florida man seen here shooting a longtime enemy. Is it self-defense, premeditated murder, or neither one? The Daily Debrief brings you the day in court. It's Friday, December 13th.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to break down for you now all of the critical testimony from an Arizona state trooper who was shot in the face and survived to take the witness stand. Ramon Bueno is the defendant. Trooper James Casey, the victim. Casey pulled over a vehicle for having dark tinted windows, and authorities say Bueno, one of the backseat occupants, started shooting. Casey testified that his interactions with all of the people in that car were odd, so he asked everyone for ID to check to see if they had active warrants. He said the man who prosecutors think was Ramon Bueno gave him a fake name, so he asked the man for a social security number. Trooper Casey explains what happened from there.
When he said 6, I started to lean in because it sounded like he was giving me something, and he said 0, and I heard 0, and the next thing I heard was an explosion. And as I've said, I always thought it spun me completely around, but it spun me. The last thing I remember is I saw Trooper Alfano, and he had a look of terror on his face, and I don't remember anything after that. I just went down. Ray, or Trooper Cruz, Ray, I saw him. I remember him straddling me, and I remember I was looking up at him, and he kept saying, Casey, Casey. He's like, you okay, you okay? And I remember he told me that I had been shot. And I was making a mental note not to touch my face because I was afraid if I put my hands in my face, I'd feel a gaping hole and I would go into shock and die. You know, he was like just shaking me and telling me, you know, don't let that scumbag kill you. You know, hang in, hang in. I remember when I leaned over and I was hanging over and I was just letting the blood run out of my mouth. I mean, it really started dawning on me that I'm dying. I just didn't think I was going to make it.
It was unclear from some of the troopers' early testimony exactly where everyone's hands were inside that car, but prosecutors tried to clarify that before turning Casey over to the defense.
He's sitting at the defense table. He's got a white shirt, a gray tie, and he's wearing glasses. The driver, she had her hands on the steering wheel, so her hands are accounted for. The front seat passenger, Vanessa Martinez, has her hands on both her legs like this. Both her hands are accounted for. Mr. Bueno has his left hand on his left leg. He has his right hand under a blanket. Valeria Jaime has a blanket, and she's wrapped up like this. I see both of the tops of her hands and her knuckles. Danny Vargas is laying on the window like this. Both of his hands are accounted for. As I've stated many a times after this, I got so focused on identifying that man over there, losing track of his right hand almost cost me my life. So I'm 100% sure he shot me.
Trooper Casey originally identified another man as the shooter, the man who was sitting next to defendant Bueno in the back seat. That man's name, Danny Vargas. He pleaded guilty to gang charges and is serving a 15-year sentence. The defense reminded the jury that Trooper Casey's 100% certainty at trial was not 100% certainty earlier on.
This gentleman in position number 1 is actually the second person you focused on in the line, correct?
I don't recall which order I focused on people, but he was the one I chose.
Do you remember initially pointing the person in position number 6 before you went to the person in position number 1? You didn't sign it, but you went there and then you went to the person in position number 1?
I don't recall, but I would tell you if I did, it was because if you look at his goatee, it's not that full, firm one that number 2 does. So that's what I was focusing on, and he didn't have as a full of face.
So before the gunshot, you saw no movement in the car, correct?
You're talking about this is my second approach, correct? No, not at that time, no, I did not.
So no movement prior to being shot. At that point in time, and you've got your notepad in your hand.
Yes.
Correct?
That's correct.
You didn't observe a muzzle blast.
No, I did not.
And you did not see a firearm.
I I heard one, but I did not see one. No, I didn't hear a muzzle blast, but I heard a shot, yes. But I did not see a gun. No, I did not.
The jury is allowed to ask questions in this trial. Jurors wanted to know where Trooper Casey was looking and why he took his eyes off of a group of people he testified were acting strangely.
The driver had her hands on the wheel. The passenger had her hands on her legs. Lone had one hand on his left leg. He had one hand under the blanket. Valeria had both hands grabbing a blanket, holding it up. Danny Vargas was laying there. 9 out of 10 hands I can account for. The one hand I can't account for, it was his right hand, and that would be the one holding the gun, shooting. When I lost track of his hands was the second approach I was at. This is after I had Trooper Cruz and Alfano with me now. So now the first time was basically, I was getting everybody's information. My second approach, now we're in the investigative stage of it. So I was, at this point is where I lost track of his hands because like I said, I got so focused, it was an error. It was a tactical error on my part. And as I said, it almost cost me my life. I got so focused on identifying him, trying to ID him, that I lost track of that right hand, and that hand went under the blanket. Every other hand I can account for. So, and a gun doesn't just fire on its own.
The suspects were arrested after a manhunt. Here is how a different officer described making contact with defendants Bueno and Vargas inside a home in Phoenix.
Mr. Bueno was in the outside the house, and he walked into the carport area, the covered area behind the truck. And at that time, he was directed by officers outside the bar to put his hands on the wall.
Was he compliant?
He was compliant.
Was he taken into custody?
Eventually, he was. What happened was officers directed him to come back to the armor because officers won't approach the house, exposing themselves to potential danger. So they remained behind the armor, directed him back to their location where they took him into custody.
Was Mr. Vargas taken into custody that same day?
Yes, he was. After Mr. Bueno was taken into custody, my task was as a negotiator. So I focused my attention on the house and started communicating to people inside the house, telling them that they need to come outside. And Mr. Vargas did comply with that. He walked outside eventually, and he was taken into custody with other people.
Were there multiple supervisors on scene?
Yes, there were.
To your knowledge, was there a beating of Mr. Bueno when he was contacted?
Not to my knowledge.
4 guests are with us tonight. Attorney Mike Korubanix is here in New York with me, along with Judge Brandon Birmingham, visiting from Dallas, Texas. Usually we're talking through a screen, but we're in person today. So, Judge, your job is to sit on the bench and make sure trials like this proceed in a legally correct and orderly fashion. When you watch this trial, do you think the advocacy has been good? Is everything rolling along smoothly?
Everything's rolling along very well. This is obviously an emotional trial. It's a very high-profile case, the shooting of a police officer in such a horrific way, a scary way. Everything is coming out as it should, which is, I think, that the lawyers are getting the witnesses to get at the truth in this case.
I think the defense has done a great job. I don't know if the defense has a great case, but the defense has been asking some pointed questions here. Mike Korubanix, is everyone's hand accounted for in this case, or is there reasonable doubt?
I don't think there's a reasonable doubt. I think this officer did a great job of giving circumstantial evidence and showing how he came to that conclusion. So it's strong.
Let's switch to our other guest now. Gigi Gonzalez is in Miami. Michael Bryant is in our newsroom. So, Michael, your thoughts on that? Do you think there's reasonable doubt here? Do you think it's possible that one of the other occupants may have fired when the officer was looking in another direction, trying to get that Social Security number?
I mean, clearly that's what the jury's going to have to figure out. And I do believe, Aaron, I know you hate to hear this, but the sympathetic nature of the victim, the horrific nature of the crime, an unlikable defendant, if there is reasonable doubt, I think this jury is going to get past it.
Well, that would be messing up the burden of proof. Gigi Gonzalez, your thoughts on this one?
You know, I think that the prosecution has done an incredible job at, identifying that this shot came from the backseat driver's side. You know, the forensic evidence, Lori's testimony, Officer Casey's testimony, all align with that theory. However, I think the reasonable doubt comes in. You got 5 people in the car. Who's the one that shot? And the only conflicting thing you have is Officer Casey's identification in the stand-up And you've got the, in court testimony that he was so focused on identifying Mr. Bueno that he almost lost his life because of it. So that's going to be the point where the jury is going to be conflicted.
And that's what the jury will have to reconcile as we watch this case move into closing arguments next week, from my understanding. Still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, a verdict in the retrial of a Florida man who is seen in this surveillance footage shooting and killing a longtime enemy. Did self-defense work this time around or not? We're back in just a moment. A Florida jury has found a defendant guilty of a lesser offense after he claimed he killed a longtime enemy in self-defense. Prosecutors say Delinord Dumercy killed James D'Angelo Peoples out of jealousy. Authorities say a woman named Darnisha McCrae was pregnant with Dumercy's child while she was dating Peoples. Dumercy's first case ended in a mistrial after he argued the unarmed Peoples attacked him and that he fired in self-defense. Prosecutors said text messages, however, between Dumercy and his pregnant ex-girlfriend proved the killing was premeditated. Legally, the jury agreed with neither theory.
We, the jury, find as follows. As to count one, we found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser included offense. If you find the defendant guilty of this offense, you must answer the following 4 questions. 1. During the commission of this offense, did the defendant discharge a firearm and cause death or great bodily injury to James D. Peoples? Yes. Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant carry, display, use, threaten to use, or attempt to use some type of weapon? Yes.
Let's back up now and look at some of the evidence. Here is how the defendant described what happened in a police interview after the shooting.
Did he have a gun? Yeah, I wasn't sure, to be honest. When I saw him in the car, he just looked at me, pulled down the window.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, you're in the store, and you said that you see him coming into the store?
Yeah.
Okay.
He saw me when I got to the store.
Okay.
And as soon as he saw me, he got out of the car, and he was trying to say something.
Okay, where did you shoot him? I know where you shot him, outside of the store, but did you talk to him, or did you say, hey, I don't want nothing to do, but you already had your gun out, right, at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know they shot at me.
Okay, but did you try to talk to him and just say, leave me alone, point the gun at him, or did you have a conversation with him and then shoot him, or did you?
I just reacted fast. I thought my life was in danger.
Dumercy took the stand and testified he'd known the victim since the two of them were teenagers. He said he also knew the victim was violent and that he lived in fear of being attacked or even hunted.
He was known to carry a firearm during even high school days, dating to adulthood. The first direct threat from him, it was the day I was coming from work on my morning job, and I was riding by a park. I heard a loud bang, and next to my feet, dirt flew up. I look, I turn around, and I see a dread-headed person, a person with dreads, hanging outside the window with a handgun. The second shot was fired. It went through my shoulder, went past my shoulder, and then I ran. At the time, I didn't know who shot at me. 2 days after the shooting, my last night of work at Schulerberger, I received a call, and he says, anywhere you stay, anywhere you work, anywhere you live, I'll find you and kill you. You're not worth it, but I'll make you worth it. And I asked him, who's this? And he said it was James. And after that, I hung up the phone. It was affirmed that I was being hunted like an animal now, so I quit both of my jobs. The guy apparently knew where I was living and working, so I decided it was time for me to just go on and run. So sad to say, I had to basically become homeless. And I started living in some bushes under a bridge near Boynton Beach, just trying to find some secure place.
Defendant Dumercy testified that his interaction with the victim started across the street from the gas station where the shooting happened. Dumercy said he thought the victim was after him, so he reacted by going to the gas station for safety. But he said the victim followed him.
I look outside the window. I see the car he was in drop him off at the gas pump. As he's walking towards the Chevron, the same car swerves and parks right in front of my bike. And my only means of transportation is blocked off, and my exit is blocked off.
What happened next?
Then that's when I knew he was specifically coming for me. I turned around and reached into my book bag. As I stepped outside, I fired the initial shot at Mr. Peoples. He turned. I thought he was reaching for a rifle. I believed he was reaching for a handgun. And then I shot him a second time. When I ran after him, I was going to hold him at gunpoint until the police came, but he reached up and tried to grab the gun I had, so it was a little wrestle. During all this, I looked to my side. The car he was in was gone. I didn't know if they were going to come back, shoot back at me, and retaliate, so I left the scene.
But did you believe that had you not pulled and used your weapon, that you yourself would have been shot or seriously hurt?
Yeah.
Is that why you shot Mr. Peoples?
Yeah. I believed he was coming to kill me. I believed he was going to make promise on his threat.
On cross-examination, the prosecution confronted the defendant with the text messages that the state says make the case for premeditated murder.
Now, tell him to bring his chrome because I've been wanting this. Next time I see him, I'll put that bullet through his head. Right?
Correct.
Now, you also, a few days later, tell Darnisha, if I can't have you, then no one will. I ain't got nothing to lose. I'll end anyone you're with. Right?
Well, during our relationship, we sent a message. Is this a yes or no question, or do I?
Well, just respond to the question that was asked.
Well, during our relationship, there's been messages where we basically said nobody can have anybody else. It was a relationship.
Okay, but none of those are on your phone, right?
As I said, if we're able to get my old phone, you would be able to see those.
None of those are on the phone that this text message is on, right? Because she didn't say that to you between the last time you had threatened her and James, right?
When have I ever threatened her?
You don't consider if I can't have you, then no one will? I ain't got anything to lose. I'll end anyone you're with a threat?
Is that a threat to her? Am I threatening her? No.
So the threat to James is not a threat to her?
This is not even specific. You're saying a threat to James. I'm not threatening James.
Okay, this is how the state attacked the defendant's story about defending himself.
You enter the gas station, and I believe you testified today that the reason that you're going in your backpack is because you planned on running out the back door and you couldn't run with the gun.
Yeah, it's a fully loaded gun. I didn't want it bouncing around in my book bag.
Right. Well, you're actually going in there because you had decided that you were going to shoot James Peoples once you got out of the car, right?
No.
You testified to the jury that when you went to shoot James, you shot him the first time, right? And then you told the jury that you thought that James was reaching for a gun, which is why you shot him the second time in the back, right?
Correct.
You didn't tell the police that.
Correct.
Right? What you told the police is that you shot him over and over, and then you kept trying to shoot him once he was grabbing at your legs, right?
Yeah, here's the other half. I'm saying that police were making me say things. Even the doctor yesterday said there were 2 shots, standing up. How could I shoot him on the ground when a professional told you it was 2 shots standing up? It was pressured by the police. I said something that didn't even happen.
Well, your gun was jammed. You kept trying to shoot him, but the bullets didn't come out, right?
And again, yes. And like I said, the police made me say I shot him on the ground, which didn't happen. Even you said the gun was jammed.
Let's jump in with some analysis here now. Michael Bryant, Gigi Gonzalez back to discuss this case. So, Gigi, you got a defendant up there. He's arguing back with the prosecutor. He's saying, oh, he lied to police. That's not really what happened. Oh, wait a minute, it is what happened. What do you make of it?
He's inconsistent, and it affects his credibility. The fact that the gun didn't push any bullets out when he was trying to shoot him from the ground doesn't mean that he wasn't trying to shoot him. Right? So the fact that he's trying to needle this weird thread through this needle I don't really like it. I think that this defendant is just trying to back himself out of this corner that he's found himself in by talking to the police, and it's really not a good fit for him.
Michael Bryant in our newsroom tonight. What did you think of the threatening text messages being pushed back at the defendant and the defendant saying, oh, well, I was only threatening the person who has threatened me my entire life, but not the girlfriend?
It's interesting to look at these text messages and you put them in the context of your own texting. I probably wouldn't text as forcefully and as threatening as some of the texts we saw in this case, but that doesn't mean they mean as much as somebody might put into that text. I wouldn't be that violent about it, but maybe that's everyday life for these guys. They want to look bad. They don't want to look tough. They're going to talk in a bigger, more violent way. So I didn't put as much into the text messages either way.
Look, the next time you text me, I'm going to be reading between the lines. Michael Bryant in the newsroom tonight. Let's switch into the studio here. Mike Korobanix, Judge Brandon Birmingham. Judge, the jury went for second-degree murder here. Under Florida law, that's not premeditated, so the jury didn't buy the argument the state was making that the text messages proved that this was thought out ahead of time. Interesting.
It is interesting. I think it might have a little bit to do with their view of the person that was killed and all of the circumstances that led up to it. There's obviously a lot of friction between the two. Maybe the jurors didn't like the victim as much as they would like would for a first-degree conviction.
Mike Korobanix, when you look at the video of the shooting, it doesn't look like the standard run-of-the-mill self-defense case. And I'm wondering if the jury turned around and said, well, we need to make a compromise here somewhere. We don't think it looks like self-defense, so we're not going to wipe the slate clean for this defendant, but it also doesn't look like first-degree premeditated murder in Florida.
I agree with you. I think that's what the jury did. They didn't like the whole facts of this case, and I think they believed he was afraid of them, but I don't think they believed he met the legal standard for self-defense.
Judge Birmingham, I'll put you on the spot. Under Florida law, second-degree murder can carry up to life in prison. If you were on the bench in this case and you had to make the decision, what would you do?
I think that video shows very clearly somebody who intended and carried out a killing that did not seem to be justified.
So you're not giving me a term of years. You don't want to do that.
I can't do that.
Okay, but you're giving me the analysis, and that helps us understand what happened in that video from your position, your expertise. I think the rest of us agree. Mike Korobanix, if I'm wrong, we can fight about it later because we're out of time. Judge, great to see you in studio here. Mike Korobanix, the rest of our panelists tonight hitting the road for the weekend. Thank you for joining us here on The Debrief and on the Law&Crime Network. We'll see you Monday starting at 9 a.m. Take care.